Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to be talking about an issue that I've been looking forward to for some time, and that has to do with this area of defending the Christian faith. So often here on Point of View, we talk about the fact that we really want to help you articulate a biblical worldview, but we also want to help you to defend a biblical worldview, and that's why we talk about this area of apologetics and how to defend the Christian faith. And in many ways, archaeology has really been the friend of the Bible, because we have so much archaeological evidence for the historicity of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But debate ranges over and really rages over one of these issues, and that is the issue of the Exodus. And what I think you're going to see over this next hour is that we have a lot better evidence than we might have been led to believe, even though we are told by archaeologists that we really do not have evidence for the existence of Jewish people, the Semitic people in Egypt. We have no evidence for their multiplication and slavery, and then, of course, a judgment and an exodus, and even later a conquest of Jericho and many of the other cities. Perhaps they were looking in the wrong place. And this is all part of a new film series that was first shown in theaters back many months ago, but is now released on DVD and a wonderful hardcover book. And it's entitled Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, A Filmmaker's Journey. And we are privileged to have with us today by phone the filmmaker himself, Timothy Mahoney, who is also an individual that has established what is called Thinking Man Films. And so, Timothy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me, Kerby.
In some respects, this came from a crisis of faith in your life, really wondering whether or not you could trust the historical account in the book of Exodus.
Exactly. When I first went to begin this project, I didn't have a crisis of faith. I had known about the stories. I was raised in a family. My mother was a single parent, and she was a person of faith, and she read to us from the Bible. And she put a lot of faith in these stories because they were meaningful to her. If God could rescue Moses and the Israelites and Joshua and all the stories in the Bible, then God would be there for her and her 4 children. And so when I went and heard about the fact that there was a possibility to go on a project and film in Egypt, to look for the route of the Exodus, that began what was kind of an adventure for me. It sort of was an opportunity to really see the Bible and to see what would happen, the routes and the locations. As people have gone to Israel, for example, it means something more once you've been to those locations. But when I went to the very location where the Israelites were said to have been, the ancient city of Ramesses, and went to this dig site, and I asked an archaeologist, one of the world's top Egyptologists, I said, have you found evidence for the Israelites here? He said, so far, not.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that, honestly, I was once playing catcher when I was a kid, and I got hit by a bat. The guy who threw the bat, and I remember waking up near the backstop or whatever. It was a similar experience because
yes.
For a moment there, I was like, I didn't even know what to say next.
Yes.
Because I was expecting him to say yes. We found quite a bit. But he said so far not. He hadn't found anything at the time that he was assuming that the time of the Exodus should be. And this is the big challenge. This was the big challenge that I ran into in the academic world, is that all focus has been around this 1250 BC time period, time of Ramesses. And the film explains that, and the book does, that this is where everyone is looking for the Exodus story.
Let me just real quickly, because we want to spend most of our time talking about the positive evidence, just talk about the fact that the first part of your book and the first part of your video shows those interviews and a little bit of your own personal journey. And, you're confronted by all sorts of individuals, and you even have an interview that Michael Medved does with Rabbi Wolpe and others. And you, after a while, I'm glad that you had the rest of the film, because if people saw that, it would be a real crusher to faith, because you are showing person after person saying, well, if we're looking for Moses when Ramesses is the Pharaoh, we have no evidence of that, and possibly even negative evidence. But let's now get to the key point, and that is the need to actually correlate biblical history with Egyptian history. And that's where you began to run into some individuals that began to suggest that maybe we were looking in the wrong time period, that Ramesses is in what is called the New Kingdom. But if you go back a little bit further to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, you now begin to find things that are very supportive, I would say, of the biblical narrative. True?
Right. And I know that I've looked at, you're an author, and you've written quite a bit. And this whole question of, well, how do we take this book, which claims that it's a history book, right? The Bible is basically built on the idea that it's writing a history from the beginning of creation all the way through, even into the future. And what I started to realize was that when I came back from that, I basically did have a crisis of faith, which you asked me in the beginning. And I was able to find some other sources. And I think there's challenges with everybody. All of us have questions. And what ended up happening, which was healthy, is it's okay to have questions and to that, but you need to then work at trying to find answers for those questions, because guess what? There was amazing patterns of evidence that we didn't, earlier know about. But it was the fact that I ran into this crisis that motivated me to go and look for more help. And I found, like you said, Egyptologist David Rohl had written a book about the very same dig site, and he identified, and he wasn't a believer. He wasn't looking at this from a Christian standpoint. He was just looking at it from an archaeological standpoint. And everyone kept saying, well, yeah, this evidence kind of looks like the Bible, but it can't be at that time, because we all know when the Exodus happened. Well, you see, a lot of things in history, or a lot of things in the world, are based upon assumptions. And these assumptions are handed down from generation to generation. But they could be wrong. And I think that that's exactly what the film uncovers,
yes,
is that a lot of these assumptions are wrong. So if you go back to the Bible and you look at what did it exactly say, and let's take 6 major events, and let's feel confident and free to challenge the Bible against what is considered mainstream archaeology. And let's look for the events of the Bible anywhere in Egypt's history. And that's where this adventure, this story begins, because there is amazing evidence that starts to come out of the history of Egypt and the history in the promised land of Canaan.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll spend a little more time getting into that. And for those of you that are taking some notes, we're going to look at evidence for the arrival of Semitic people, evidence for the multiplication, because we see that in the scriptures, certainly evidence for slavery, then evidence for judgment that God would bring, evidence for the Exodus, and evidence for the conquest. And we'll go through some of this fairly quickly, but again, we highly commend to you the DVD, Filmmaker's Journey, Patterns of Evidence on Exodus, and of course this new hardback book, Patterns of Evidence. And again, you will find some of those resources on our website, which we link to. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Timothy Mahoney right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ryan Anderson at the Heritage Foundation has been at the forefront of defending traditional marriage. He's one of the co-authors of the book, What is Marriage? And he goes on college campuses and hostile media venues to defend marriage and to question various attempts to legalize and normalize same-sex marriage. His new book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom, deals with the subject from a number of different angles and provides practical help for people willing to engage the discussion. One of his chief concerns is how opponents will portray those of us who believe in traditional marriage. He begins with a question: bigots or pro-lifers? Will defenders be treated like bigots, or will the marriage debate parallel the abortion debate? He believes the outcome will depend on us by taking a lesson from what happened after the Supreme Court decision on abortion. He says the pro-life community woke up and responded to a bad court ruling. They focused on the flaws in the ruling and were able to make the case that the freedom of pro-life people should not be infringed by forcing them to pay for abortion. Now we need to do three things: label the same-sex marriage ruling for what it is, judicial activism. Second, protect our freedom to speak and live according to the truth. And third, make a convincing case in the public arena. In his book, Ryan Anderson talks about the truth about marriage and the consequences of redefining marriage. He cites each of the justices in the Supreme Court case showing that this ruling is indeed judicial tyranny. And he has whole chapters dealing with the victims, both children in homosexual unions as well as people who decided not to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. If you want to know how to respond to this new normal and learn how to make the case for marriage and religious freedom, this is a book you need to read. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Timothy Mahoney, who is the filmmaker with Thinking Man's Films, and we're talking about patterns of evidence on Exodus. And Timothy, before we get into some of the basics, let's talk about this issue of Ramesses, because if we look in our Bibles, we can see that it does say in the book of Genesis that the word Ramesses was used to describe the land where Joseph's family settled. But the key to understanding this chronology is recognize that could be an anachronism. For example, if I were to say that people settled in New York City in the, say, the 15th, 16th century, something like that, people would say, well, no, it was called New Amsterdam back then. Use an example of being in St. Paul, but at one time that was given a different name, Pig's Eye. So they used the modern name, but that doesn't necessarily mean that had it that name when Joseph and his family settled. True?
That's correct, yes, and that's something that we saw. David Roll also pointed out that there's another reference, by the way. When Joseph's family settled in Egypt, early part in Genesis it talks about this. It says they settled in the land of Ramesses. This is a very interesting clue here because Ramesses wasn't even born. The name wasn't even around, from what we can tell.
Right.
So we knew that what was happening was they were giving a name to a location as opposed to a time period. And so what the latter writers who were basically trying to let people know, where am I talking about? They were saying, these cities in this area. But what we find, and what they find in the archaeology, this archaeologist that I had once to talk to in the Delta, was that he was uncovering a city underneath the city of Ramesses, which was much older. And that's the city of Avaris. And that city was where all of the archaeology was pointing to the arrival of the early Israelites.
Well, and again, I think we should point out that the buildings look more Semitic. There's a place where they have 12 graves. Think about the 12 tribes. You go into one of those graves, though, and it's built like a pyramid as if it were for an Egyptian leader. You go in there and you see this statue, and it looks obviously like something that is not Egyptian, and the individual is wearing a coat of many colors. Now, I would just, of course, I'm giving away a lot of the film, and you can go into it in a lot more detail, but immediately that says, well, that looks a lot like Joseph, his family. I think we've actually uncovered where actually they lived. And tell us a little bit more about, as they began to dig this out, recognizing that the reason this has been rejected in the past by archaeologists is because it was seen as too early, but maybe we were looking for the wrong place for Joseph and then the Israelites.
That's correct. In other words, people have, there's such a strong influence that this story wasn't true from about the last 50 or 60 years because of the fact they couldn't find it at the time of Ramesses, that they've kind of ignored all the rest of it. And it's actually been, there were Egyptologists that told me that it's politically incorrect to even start to suggest or to look or reference any of these stories anymore, that we're way beyond that. And you kind of get a taste of that in the film, is that no one can have a career looking for the stories of the Bible anymore. I don't know if you know this, but Egyptology was actually funded and originated by churchmen, by people who were interested in the relationship between the Bible and Egypt. And they went there. So a lot of the early funding came from people who had a Bible in one hand and a spade in the other hand. And they were out looking for these things. So, and what David Roll has told me is that the Bible was used originally to synchronize Egyptian history. And then from that point on, Egyptian history has been used to discredit the Bible.
Yeah, just amazing. One of the relatives of my father was an Egyptologist, and again, a lot of them had some basic faith a long time ago, but again, that has changed. But in the first part that we talked about, the evidence for the arrival, it seems to me that we have evidence of those people that came down from Canaan. These would be Semitic people. And when we begin to look at the settlements, that brings us to the second point, because do we have any evidence of the multiplication of these individuals when you look at Avaris? Tell us about that.
Right. What ended up happening was that they began as a small group. They can see that in the archaeology. And then this small group basically grew into one of the largest cities in the ancient world, is what I'm told. And in the film, we were actually able to get the dig site information, and we recreated it. So what you're seeing when you look at in the book and the film is a recreation of this ancient city, possibly very much like you would have seen. We put the palaces and the temples and different buildings in the actual locations they were found. So that's the thing that I got really excited about, was maybe what we're seeing right now is, in a sense, we're looking into the past by this reconstruction of this ancient city. The very city that it appears that matches the story of the Israelites coming and multiplying to such a degree that leads to this next part of it. It's first arrival, multiplication, and then slavery. The archaeology at that location says that these people then went from being prosperous to being impoverished. They started dying at a very young age. And that's the third pattern that we look for, slavery. And we start seeing this happening in this whole area. And the Bible says they grew to such a great number that the Egyptians were worried that they might join their enemies and overthrow the Egyptians. So they enslaved these people. And that's exactly what matches the story, again, of the Bible and the archaeological record.
Let's talk a little bit more about that idea of slavery, because you learn a little bit more about the individuals when you dig up the graves, and you see that at one point they were prosperous, because you can see this in their bone structure and their health and even how what they were buried with. And then all of a sudden you see that these are people that are obviously under some kind of persecution, and that's obviously slavery. Well, then it brings us to another question, because then, of course, there was the edict from the Pharaoh to kill the firstborn males, and all of a sudden, then as you dig down, you see in some of these graves a very high proportion of children in these graves. And so that's kind of intriguing, but that could have been a plague that just affected just in newborns. But then as you begin to look at the individuals who were slaves and who were serving, obviously, within the Pharaoh's court, you see a very high proportion of females and a very low proportion of males. And so those two things which come from the grave also seem to verify what you see in the book of Exodus as well, right?
Yes, that's correct. And so, you're looking for clues that are 3,500 years old, but this case is basically telling you that there's a high level of infant mortality. And why it's interesting is it's way higher than anywhere else in the ancient world.
Yes.
So number two, they found these little bone boxes and ossuary boxes that were underneath their homes. So something was happening where they were putting these, if they had to kill the babies, or they were something was going on in not only one location but multiple locations from what they could see. Number two, like you said, the women, there was a higher level of women that were being buried than men. Something happened to the adult male population that was reducing them, and so that matched again this story. And the other thing is that we started to see in the slave list names that were Hebrew, Semitic names, Menachem. They actually had other names, trying to remember them right now, Shiphrah, Asher,
yeah.
Issachar.
Yeah.
These names were coming out of a slave list.
These are Jewish names in the Brooklyn Papyrus, yes.
Right, that's correct. So anyway, very interesting. Once again, we start getting these patterns that connect the story in the right sequence at the right time, and they're happening in the Middle Kingdom, not in this new kingdom, the time of Ramesses.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more. If you've been kind of paying attention or taking some notes, we've talked about evidence of an arrival, evidence of a multiplication, and evidence of slavery. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about, is there any evidence for a judgment? That's a little tougher to get, but we certainly have some evidence there. Evidence of an actual exodus that takes place. And then finally, do we have any evidence of a conquest of Jericho and many of these other cities? And of course, the answer is yes. And again, we are obviously encouraging you to get a copy of the book, which is fascinating, as well as the DVD. You can get either or. And again, we are sending you to patternsofevidence.com. We have all the links on our website, and you can follow that. And this will be, I think, something that would be of great encouragement for those of you that are church leaders. You might even think about showing the DVD in your church. For those of you that are Sunday school teachers, you might take some of the material from the book and use that to teach those individuals in the class. And I think there's just going to be some great opportunities for you to use that. So go to our website, pointofview.net. That will point you to Patterns of Evidence Exodus, a filmmaker's journey. And we have an opportunity to talk with that filmmaker and his own personal journey as he learned more about the archaeological evidence for the Exodus. We'll be back with more right after this.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5 Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us today Timothy Mahoney, and again he is with Thinking Man Films and is the filmmaker that produced Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, a filmmaker's journey. And if you've been paying attention and maybe even taking some notes, we've talked about evidence for the arrival of the Jews into Egypt, certainly the evidence for multiplication and the evidence for slavery. Let's now get to one of the more difficult parts. It takes us, of course, Timothy, to Exodus and to Moses himself. He sees the burning bush. Of course, we have no archaeological evidence for that. He goes and confronts Pharaoh, who is resistant, and then we have the 10 plagues. There are those who say, well, we have no evidence of any of this, but you go to the Netherlands, to Leiden, and there is a manuscript in the Leiden Museum known as the Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage, in which his record seems to parallel dramatically what we read in the Bible. Tell us more, if you might.
That's correct. There's this, it's called a Middle Kingdom document, and it's a poetic document that talks about there's sort of a warning to people in the future. Don't do these different types of things. And it's basically considered an eyewitness account of events. Now, what's very interesting about this is people have been looking at it and said, yeah, that really, there's quotes there seem to match the Bible. For example, in the Bible it says, God is speaking to Moses, says, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water that you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. And what does Ippor write? He writes, behold, Egypt is fallen to the pouring of water, and he who poured water on the ground seizes the mighty in misery. It's poetic. But it's so interesting that you would say, well, that's just sort of coincidence or something. Well, then the Bible says, and the water in the Nile was turned to blood, and the fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled it so bad that the Egyptians could not drink of it. That's Exodus 7. So what does Ippor write? The river is blood. If you drink of it, you lose your humanity and thirst for water. And so there are many of these different passages that were very similar to what happened. But what happened with the archaeologists or Egyptologists said, yes, but this isn't related to the time of the Exodus. The Exodus happened during the time of Ramesses. This is much earlier, and so it's not connected. And Martin Raven, the person who I was interviewing, he says we have to realize that he didn't really see these things. He just imagined them. Mm-hmm. Well, how do we know? I mean, that's sort of, in a sense, kind of a humorous thing that he would say. And I said, why is that? Why did you imagine them? He says, because they're too fantastic.
Yeah. Again, he starts with two assumptions. Number one, this is too early for when the Exodus took place. And number two, kind of an anti-supernatural view because, it talks about there's sort of loud wailing throughout Egypt because children are born. And, of course, the Bible talks about that as well. And as you said, the river turned to blood and it rains down on the land and the flax and barley are destroyed. There's a one-to-one parallel. You've got 2 full pages in your book to show the parallels, but if you start with an assumption that there is no supernatural and miracles don't happen, and you also start with the assumption that this was recorded hundreds of years before when Egyptologists tell us the Exodus took place, then you reject it out of hand. But if you start with the assumption that we've talked about here, that indeed it is quite likely, matter of fact, there's probably very good evidence that the Exodus took place during what's called the Middle Kingdom, this lines up in ways that people probably would never have imagined.
Right. And what we're dealing with is 2 different chronologies. We're dealing with a chronology as a timeline for your listeners, and it's trying to figure out, like a detective. That's why I think people have enjoyed it. It's the film makes it easy for people to understand because we define things, but there's a wall of time, and on the wall of time we show when things happen in Egypt history and when things happen in the Bible history. And I want to be clear, because we're not saying that the biblical history has changed at all. What we're suggesting is that the Egyptian time, when people have in the last several hundred years have decided when events happen at different periods of time, the film is saying that according to Egyptians' history, it's earlier than what they thought it should be. But later on the film, we start to discuss, well, is Egypt's timeline accurate?
Right.
Because there's many people that know that there's a lot of things that don't add up here. And so anyway, I wanted to mention one thing, which I find fascinating, is that, we know the 10th plague was the one plague, the plague that allowed then Pharaoh to be broken and for them to leave Egypt. And the Bible says, now at midnight the Lord struck every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and every firstborn of livestock. And Ippor then writes, Behold, plague sweeps the land. Blood is everywhere, with no shortage of the dead. He who buries his brother in the ground is everywhere. Woe is me for the grief of this time.
What you find, and interestingly enough, is then when you start looking at some of the burial areas, you see people just thrown into there, almost like there was a plague. You know, there's not the orderly kind of burial, because just imagine if the firstborn throughout the land were killed, then you have something that looks almost like the burial sites in a Holocaust or something like that. And again, you have pictures of where it is very obvious that those bodies are dropped upon each other. And that brings us to our second to the last one, any evidence for an exodus. And the fact is, you seem to have in some of these places, many of these towns just seemingly abandoned instantaneously. You also do not have the bones of that place that many people think is where Joseph was born. Why is that significant?
Well, it is amazing because Joseph told his brothers before he died. He knew the promise to his great-great-grandfather, or his great-grandfather, Abraham. Anyway, he knew the promise, which was that they're going to return to the land. And he said, I want you to take my bones when you leave back to me, back to the promised land. And so when the archaeologists dug this site, what they found very odd was that when people go into a grave and rob it, they don't take bones. But in this particular case, this tomb had been broken into, and a tunnel had gone in there. And guess what? The bones of that Semitic ruler in the Delta, they were missing. And that matched exactly the story of Joseph telling his brothers.
Yes.
And that whole community then, that city, that area in that city, the people left in that area and in another area that we know of right now called Cahoon, further south. So what we find is matching evidence again, and that's what patterns of evidence does. And let me just share something. There's lots of theories about when the Exodus happened. But what I started to see as a filmmaker who was trying to deal with this is that if you take the scientific approach and said, what are the 6 events that have to all show up like a key in a lock? They have, in other words, you can have a pet idea, but if you don't have all 6 and they don't fit the right sequence, then you're not going to open up that lock.
Well, again, I think you've done a very good job of that. And certainly what we need to maybe do is finish out that 6th one, and that would be the evidence of a conquest. And again, you show us doing interviews with various individuals, archaeologists, or even some of the work that was done in the past by Kathleen Kenyon. And again, they all reject this idea that Jericho was destroyed by Joshua because they're working with the old chronology. They're actually saying that this couldn't have taken place during that time of the New Kingdom because this took place using the Egyptian kind of chronology in the Middle Kingdom. But up until now, you said, well, I've got 5 of those 6 already in the lock, and it's turning the lock. So if we go back and refocus that and recognize that there was a time in which the walls of Jericho did tumble back down, and then it was burned, and there's a very evidence of burn layer, then you see some very good evidence for, again, the last piece that we see first in the book of Exodus and then in the book of Joshua. So let's take a break. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about what Jericho and these other cities look like and finish off that last piece of evidence. But if you've just joined us, talking about this film that actually was in the theaters a number of months ago and now is available on DVD, Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, A Filmmaker's Journey, as well as this hardback book, which I would highly commend to you, over 380 pages, that actually help document the fact that if we change our view about timeline and move back to what is called the Middle Kingdom, and then begin to look at some of the archaeological evidence that we have, it all begins to match up. We have evidence for an arrival, evidence for the multiplication of the Jews, and evidence for them going into slavery, evidence for judgment, evidence for the Exodus, and when we come back from the break, we'll talk about that evidence for the conquest of these lands, and I think you will begin to be encouraged in the faith, especially as we recognize that there has been a lot of debate raging over the credibility of the Bible, and yet Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, unlocks some of that mystery and answers some of those questions. We'll continue talking with Timothy Mahoney right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we are privileged to have with us for just a few more minutes Timothy Mahoney, again, who is the filmmaker with Thinking Man Films, who actually produced Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, A Filmmaker's Journey. And again, we have links to their website, patternsofevidence.com. You can find out more about the book, about the DVD, and all sorts of other resources. We've talked about evidence for the arrival, multiplication, slavery, judgment, and Exodus. Now, if we could, Timothy, maybe the last piece. This moves us out of the book of Exodus into the book of Joshua, but there are two very important issues there. Issue number one, can we then see the evidence that is described in the Bible of 9 cities, Jericho and others, being destroyed during this conquest? Number two, what about the story in Joshua 2 about Rahab, or as I think you say in the film, Rahab, the prostitute or the harlot, and whether we have any archaeological evidence for the story that we find in Joshua? What did you find?
Well, what was interesting, I found a book in Jerusalem. It was printed in the 1920s, and it was a document that showed all the photography and the writings of the first explorers, Zelen or Zellier. I'm trying to think of his name, and he basically had gone to Jericho and had uncovered a part of the wall that hadn't fallen down, and it had some houses in it. And that was, a book that I forgot. I didn't even realize that I had that. And I started doing these interviews and hearing about this section of the wall that hadn't fallen down. And the rest of the area, from my understanding, had fallen, but this one section. And when I talked with Dr. Bryant Wood, he was saying that, this section, where it is, matches the story of Rahab. Because the Bible says that after the spies had hid at her home and she believed in what was happening, she was to put a scarlet or some type of a marker out of her window, and God would spare them. And later on, we find out that she marries someone, and she's in this line of faith, I think, all the way to David. And so what ends up happening is this character, this woman, Rahab, her story is matching the archaeology at Jericho.
And I think, again, one of the things that's so nice about the video, and even in your book, is you've got that detailed drawing of Ernst Sullen and showing where that takes place, also showing that the way the city was built, the walls had to fall down for the Jewish fighters, the children of Israel, to be able to go over it, because there were like two different walls. But when the top wall fell down, it created a natural path for them to go in and to take the city. And then, of course, you have evidence of a burn layer. I mean, even the skeptics, even the Kathleen Kenyons and others will acknowledge that there is obviously a burn layer, but they reject that being when Joshua came, because they say, oh, this is too early. They are, again, using that old Egyptian timeline and saying that by the time Joshua may have come into the land, these were just remnants of a city, and this battle that is being described in the Bible was really no big deal at all. But if you go back and recognize, as we've mentioned a couple of times here on the program, and assume that the Exodus took place during the Middle area, the Middle Kingdom, which is also known as the Middle Bronze Age, then you can begin to see that the stories that we see in the Bible are verified even by the archaeological digs of these various 9 cities.
Kerby, what's fascinating to me is that we have these different ages, that's called the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. And they are paralleling another time of history, which is called the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age. Well, the two middles are almost on top of each other. One references Egypt, the other references how we date Canaan. What's interesting about why was there a change in the names is because Egypt collapsed.
Right.
The Middle Kingdom is a collapse of Egypt between the Middle and the New Kingdom.
Which would make sense if there was a judgment and they no longer had a fighting army because they were in the underwater now and all those kinds of things. That would make sense, right?
Exactly. And so what we're saying is that within 1,000 years of Egypt's history, there's only one time when it collapsed like that. And then it collapsed to such a degree that foreigners came in and took the land over. And so what people like David Roll and John Bimson and other people are saying is that this is a sign in the archaeology that something devastated Egypt to such a degree. And there's even a historian that says God smote us. God smote us, and these foreigners were able to come into the land. And so it matches the story of the Exodus, and that's the same thing that happens in the Middle Bronze Age, is that all the cities were standing prior to that period, and then something happened where all those cities were destroyed in one fashion, whether they were completely destroyed or whether they were taken. And the Bible doesn't say that the Israelites were to destroy everything, because it said that he was going to give them houses that they didn't build and vineyards that they didn't plant. So some of this was the transference of this, and some of the cities were actually to be destroyed, like Jericho.
Yes. Well, again, just lots of great material, and in an hour we've tried to cover what I think is covered in a much more significant and detailed way in a book that's about almost 400 pages, and then also, of course, a DVD that is available. But just before we run out of time, Timothy, talk about how people can use this, because, of course, this was in the theaters, and you had thousands, tens of thousands of people that were able to see it in the theater. Now the book and the DVD is available, and I just, as I said a few minutes minutes ago, think that pastors and church leaders might think about using this to show in the church or might use this to teach in a Bible fellowship. But how would you recommend, before we run out of time, people using the book and the DVD?
Well, what's very interesting about this is that the materials are available, going to be coming out as a movie event. So pastors can get a movie event kit, gives them a public performance license for they can use it, for groups in their church. We also have a small group study that will be clips from the film and myself talking with actor Kevin Sorbo, who narrated it. He's asking me questions about how do we deal with these questions about our faith? And how do we find answers? And how do we cope with this? And this study is going to be very encouraging for people to work through some of those questions. And then we also have something I'm very excited about, a new children's series that's going to come along, which is going to be Patterns of Evidence Young Explorers. And Patterns of Evidence Young Explorers goes through the same material, but it's for ages between 8 and 16. And so there's a lot of new material that's being produced, and it's all available. And I think today, this product, this type of film, there's a lot of people out there that are saying that the Bible stories are a myth. I think every family should have this and go through it. And I'm using the term to vaccinate them from some of these. And I went on a 12-year investigation, and I'm sharing that with all these patterns of evidence that absolutely match the stories of history that we're seeing here. And what this film and book do is help to support people in their faith, and they should share it with their children. They might have young adults that don't believe. They went off to college, and they came back and said, "Pop, Mom, I don't believe this anymore. This is a fairy tale." You come and sit them down with patterns of evidence and say, "Well, let's talk about that."
I think it's just a great resource. And again, patternsofevidence.com is where you can find some of this material. We have a link on our website. And again, we commend the resources that we have been talking about today to you. Timothy Mahoney, thank you so very much for joining us. Thank you so much for doing this film project. And we look forward to the next opportunity.
Well, thanks for having me, Kerby. Really, really appreciate what you do as well.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. But again, if you have just joined us, I hope you'll maybe go back and watch the broadcast, Patterns of Evidence Exodus. Just fascinating. Very well done, and it's something that we would encourage you to get for you and your family and your church. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus on DVD. Earlier this year, thousands gathered in theaters nationwide for a one-night event, the release of a new documentary, Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. The Exodus presents new scientific evidence clearly matching the biblical account. A documentary now available on DVD, featuring narration by actor Kevin Sorbo and interviews with leading archaeologists. Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, the DVD, soundtrack, and book, and available online for digital download. More information at patternsofevidence.com. And never give up on defending life. Urge your elected representatives to defund Planned Parenthood. Please, the recent revelations have the political fire on high. Visit pointofview.net and click on the Take Action link to defund Planned Parenthood. We should not have to participate in this grisly evil. Come on, we make it easy for you to speak up with just a few clicks. Pointofview.net, take action. Pointofview.net, take action. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on, and if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This next hour is for men, but you women can listen in as well, because I think you're going to learn quite a bit today. We bring back to the microphone an individual that certainly followed for many years, John Eldredge, counselor, teacher, author of a number of best-selling books, including probably the best known, Wild at Heart, but some others, Epic and Beautiful Outlaw. He's the director of Ransom Heart, which is a ministry really restoring masculinity to millions of men worldwide. Gotta love a guy that loves archery and fly fishing and backpacking just like I do, so that's worth enough right there. But then we have an addition, and that is his son, Samuel, also, who is a writer and has a bachelor's degree in English, co-authored this book, Killing Lions. It is published by Thomas Nelson, about 180 pages, hardback. Look for it in your local bookstore, but again, if your bookstore does not have it, we have put it in our Point of View store, and you can order it online right now. We also have a video trailer of the book and information about the book, and of course a link to Ransom Heart. First of all, John, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Yeah, Kerby, thank you. It's great to be back.
Yeah, one of these days you and I need to go fly fishing together, backpacking, shoot a bow together, something. But anyway, in the interim, let me also introduce, at least for the first time to our listeners, Sam. And Sam, it's just a delight to have you join us. We've enjoyed chatting with your father, and I'm looking forward to some conversation with you today as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Well, I guess, John, let's explain the title, Killing Lions, a guide through the trials young men face. A lot of it is really the challenge to masculinity. And you use that title because in Africa, at least among some tribes, the way in which you are defined as a man is by killing a lion. Explain, if you might.
Right, exactly. In fact, in a number of ancient African cultures, you couldn't marry and you couldn't own land as a young man. You weren't considered even like a full member of the kind of the men of the tribe until you had proved yourself by killing a lion. And you see a very similar theme, actually, in the scriptures, where when David goes to confront Goliath,
yes.
Remember Saul tries to talk him out of it, and says, you're just a lad, you're a young man, you're not able to handle this. And David says, actually, I've killed both bears and lions, and the God who helped me through that will help me through this. So it's the idea of facing down something perhaps fearful, certainly something that's a great challenge, that gives a young man a sense of who he is and a sense of his place in the world, and gives him the confidence to enter into marriage, career, money, all of that stuff that young guys face.
Sam, let me come to you for just a minute. You're a little bit older now, but certainly there was a time, especially as you graduated from college, where you were in what we might call the warrior phase. And I know that you have talked about, both in the video and the book, the idea that we have sort of had this idea that, well, you become a man when, fill in the blank. You get your driver's license, you become a man when, graduate from college, whatever. And we don't really seem to have any kind of initiation. We don't have any kind of transition that is, I think, very important if we are going to grow up a generation of young men with godly attributes and with masculinity. Your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the biggest hurdles that we overcome up to college really are like getting a driver's license and going off to school or joining the military. And then you hit real life after those things. You do your stint in school or you do your tour and you come back and you realize that actually you feel just as young as before And there are so many questions. And what once was, what are you going to do this afternoon, now becomes, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do for work? What are you going to do for marriage? And all of those sorts of things about dreams and identity come raging to the surface. And without some lion, or even putting the face of a lion on some of these challenges, we'll be just wanderers.
Well, and you know, one of the things, Sam, that we talk about on this program is reaching the next generation. That's the millennial generation. And we do this not only through the radio program. We recognize many in your generation don't listen to radio, so that's why we have videos, and we encourage people to go to our YouTube channel. We encourage individuals to share these kinds of ideas because we recognize how important it is to reach your generation. But early on in the book, you really tell the story about your first job. And okay, we've all had first jobs we didn't like. You know, I've been a janitor, and I've dug ditches for gas pipes, and I've been in a machine shop. You had one as a runner, but even the people that graduated, you graduated with an English degree, but even those that graduated in a business degree, you would get together sometimes on a Friday night, and none of your peers, to
shoot for the stars or promise these full will all sort of pan out after school. I mean, it sounds good for university to say, like, if you come here and get this degree, you'll get this job and you'll make this amount of money. And then pretty quickly that has proven not to be true, both for the journey that young men go on and both because of the economy of today. And so, yeah, I've got fellow English majors that work the front desk at a hotel and friends who were business majors they're working at Starbucks. And there's a sense of loss there because there's a disconnect between what we were promised, how we were told to pursue our dreams, and the fact that we can only land small jobs, and many of us have enormous amounts of debt, and reconciling that takes some understanding. It takes, we just feel like we're wasting our time, and that's the great fear, that we will make the wrong choice, so that somewhere back in a couple of years, we already did make the wrong choice.
Wow. John Eldredge and Sam Eldredge with us today as we talk about this new book, Killing Lions, published by Thomas Nelson. Look for it in your local bookstore. I might also mention we have a link to their website. You can get some great information there and the videos, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But before we take our first break, John, let me maybe ask you a question I already know the answer for, and that is, do you think we're too soft here in America?
Well, my goodness. Every culture before ours knew that men don't become men through a soft and comfortable life. You don't see that. Again, David, his life, he's been out in the field tending the sheep, and that wasn't a romantic, Disneyland life. That was danger, hardship, weather, trial, endurance, perseverance. Those are the kinds of things that shape men. I think, Kerby, as you know, our generation kind of overindulged the millennials.
Yes.
I have a lot of regard for the millennials, but they were the generation of the self-esteem movement. And everybody, when our kids played soccer, everybody got a trophy. Every team, every kid. There was no sense of accomplishment,
yes.
Right? I think we overindulged or over-rewarded our young people. And then what happens is they hit real life and they realize not everybody does get a trophy, right? And there are hard things ahead. So I almost want to sometimes apologize for, a soft life that we've offered, particularly our young men.
Yes.
Because now then I think they feel a kind of a sense of betrayal of, hey, where's this golden life you promised me?
Well, and I think some of them say, I wish I had joined the military because it's not so soft there. But again, there are solutions to that. I need to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of those. But in the video, you also, John, asked the question of some of these millennials, what's your greatest fear? Certainly want to address that. And Sam, I want to come back to you as well and talk about how your generation's dealing with issues like meaning and purpose and calling. So we've got a lot more to cover. It's all part of the book, Killing Lions. It is a book that I certainly do recommend to the young men out there, but all of us trying to understand more about the phenomenon in our culture, I think will benefit from this book. Published by Thomas Nelson, and we'll have more to say and then take some phone calls from you right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The talk among progressives in Congress right now is how to punish any business that moves overseas to avoid paying corporate taxes in America. Perhaps they should instead ask, why are corporations and businesses wanting to move in the first place? The reason is high corporate taxes levied in this country. The title of an editorial in the Wall Street Journal says it all. We're number 32. They are explaining the findings of the Tax Foundation. The Foundation study looked at more than 40 tax policy variables and used them to rank the 34 industrialized countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation. The United States ranked 32 out of the 34 countries. The United States did do better than France, but that's a country currently run by an avowed socialist. The index was based upon two important principles: competitiveness and neutrality. A competitive tax code in a country would be one that limits the taxation of businesses and investment. Neutrality would mean the tax code would raise the most revenue with the fewest economic distortions. A country that gives various tax breaks to favored companies would not be neutral. Crony capitalism is not neutral. The Tax Foundation ranking reminds us that the U.S. tax burden on corporations and businesses is close to the worst in the industrialized world. The federal corporate tax burden is already the highest in the developed world, and the tax code also requires that money earned overseas be taxed as if it were earned in this country. Most corporations have millions overseas that they could repatriate if the tax burden were lifted. You know, over the next few weeks, we're going to hear members of Congress complain about corporations and businesses that move their headquarters overseas. They will propose building an economic wall to prevent others from escaping. Instead, we should reform the U.S. tax code. It would encourage companies to stay and might even encourage some of those countries that left to move back to America. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
John Eldredge and Sam Eldredge with us today as we talk about their book, Killing Lions, a guide through the trials young men face. And if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. You can go to killinglions.com. Of course, you can go to Ransom Heart. We have all those links there and a video that you can watch. And John, let me come back to you. One of the questions that you ask in the video trailer that people see, and I'm going to talk in just a minute about all the videos that are available. You ask a number of young men, what do you fear? I'd love to maybe have you share a few of the things that you ran into, because how a young man or even an older man faces fear, very important. And what they fear may be the very place where God is working in their lives.
Oh, exactly. And what it also reveals, I'll tip my hand early in the show, what I found, Kerby, in talking to young guys. When we say young guys, we're talking college and after, so 18 to 30, kind of in that range, is just profound fatherlessness. What they fear is that they do not have anyone to show them the way, and therefore every decision, every move, all of the weight of their future is entirely on their shoulders. And what they fear is that they don't have what it takes. They're not the man who's ready to handle that kind of life. And they'll express it in different ways. I fear making the wrong decision in my career. I fear that I won't have a retirement fund. That do I start that stuff now? I fear. Just got 2 letters today from guys. I fear that I don't have what's needed for a young marriage. Just got married in my 20s. But the collective fear is all naming the same thing. They fear that they are not man enough for the challenge.
Wow.
And they feel very, very fatherless, that there's no one there to show them the way.
Sam, let me come to you for just a minute, because I know you've talked about the fact that when you look at your peers, a fair number of them don't have fathers. I mean, we've talked about fatherless America, but you pointed out something else. You have some fathers that are absent, others that are there but emotionally absent, but you raised a third category that is important, and that is a lot of fathers who aren't fathers. They're kind of like buddies, but sometimes a young man needs a father, not a buddy.
Yeah, exactly. I knew a lot of guys who had, kind of cool dads. They would go surfing with them. They would, show up and hang out with their friends to go out and get coffee. And there's good things in that they are seeking life together, that they are doing adventures together. Except I think at some point it stems from the father fearing maybe being that bad guy or imparting on the negative fathering that he experienced. And so he does. They end up trying to be a buddy to their friend, a buddy to their son, and, they're left with a gap. They're like, okay, well, if their dad is their father, then if their dad is their buddy, then who is their father? They don't actually have that role in their life, and so they end up just as lost as though they didn't have a father to begin with.
We do mentoring programs sometimes in churches, Sam, and it seems to me that if I were to go to your church or to the college where you were or any group right now and say, how many of you young men would like to have a mentor? I suspect all sorts of hands would go up. Then if I went to the group of older men, maybe they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, how many of you would like to be a mentor? I hate to say it, but I'm not so sure that many hands would go up. And so it isn't just a problem with the fathers and sons. There's a real need for mentors to mentor a whole generation that's really looking for some guidance and some direction, don't you think?
Absolutely. Something that we heard actually while writing the book was a common desire for young men is to have an older man come to them to tell them, I have a revolution, I have a role for you, come and follow me. And just how many young guys would leap at the opportunity of that. And yet also what we found in this book, all these questions that if they don't get answered in your 20s, if you don't get the issues of fear and do you have what it takes sorted out, those questions, they're still there when you're 40 or 50 or 60. And then you get that place of older guys who can't mentor because they're still asking the same questions.
Yeah, see, Kerby, that's so good, Sam. Kerby, the reason those older guys don't raise their hand is that they don't think they have what it takes.
They didn't get their questions answered in their 20s, and they're still struggling with it in their 40s and 50s, don't you think?
It's not that they don't care.
Yeah.
They do care. It's that they don't believe they have something to offer.
Well, and here I think part of it is maybe they don't have something to offer, or it maybe is a false humility. And I've told the story once on the program, but it's worth telling again. And that is I was at a very prominent Bible church a number of years ago, and we were talking about the need to really have men step up and to provide guidance to others. And I'm sitting in this room, and this one individual pipes up and said, I just don't think I have much to offer. And I looked at him, I said, you are the chairman of the elder committee. You are the individual oldest in this room. You've worked for some of the most prominent corporations in Dallas. And if you don't feel like you have anything to offer, we're in a really bad way. And
right.
And he backed off and said, okay, and maybe that's just a little bit of humility, because I think there is a sense in which some individuals feel like they don't have a lot to offer. But if you get into one of those relationships, whether it's a parenting relationship or a mentoring relationship, you'll share something and they'll think that this was just incredibly profound. And you're thinking, gosh, I learned that 20 years ago. But that's the point. You learned it 20 years ago. They're in the midst of learning it right now. And so, John, I think that's one of the things I know that you had as a real vision there at Ransomed Heart to really help the older men, those that have maybe had some father deficit in their life. I'm taking you all the way back to your famous book, Wild at Heart, to heal that heart and then to go and pass some of those lessons on to the younger generation.
Exactly. That's exactly right, because the guys are out there, and with just a little bit of encouragement and direction, in fact, that's what we're hoping to model in this book. The Killing Lions is a conversation between father and son. It's me and Sam sorting through money and marriage and the girl and that kind of thing. But what we're hoping to do is actually model what it looks like to receive and to offer fathering. So there you go. Guys can pick this up and realize, hey, I do have something to offer young men.
Well, certainly. And when you're talking about money and dating and women, decision-making, spiritual warfare, faith, fathering, some of the issues that you raise very early in the book and all the way through the book, very important issues indeed. Just for a moment, let's talk about how people can use not only this book but your videos, because one of the things as people go to Ransom Heart, they're going to find that there's a lot more than just a book. First of all, there's the ongoing blog, but there are all the videos. They could, of course, go to killinglions.com, anywhere they want to go to get some of this information. But you have a way in which people can not only take the book and use that, but they can also use some of the other, if you will, curriculum or instruction so that they can take themselves or a group through that. And John, talk about how people can use some of the resources that you have at your ministry.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Sam describe this trip that we took and these adventure films we created for young guys, because we're really excited about this.
Okay, Sam?
Yeah, so when we grew up, we would take this guys trip out to Moab, Utah, and go mountain biking and rock climbing and jumping in the river, and it was awesome. And we went there with a group of older guys and younger guys. It was kind of our high school escape of the summer. And then we wanted to recreate this. We wanted to walk back through and invite some younger guys in and invite a couple older guys along and capture it on film so that we could actually walk through all of these issues that we were talking about, but in like a beautiful and dynamic and exciting way. We wanted to really get out there and use this medium of video, and they're crazy. They're so much fun to do. It was an amazing trip, and I think the videos you'll find are really incredible.
You can go to ransomheart.com to find that, or else, of course, we have a link on our website. Just before we take a break, let's take a phone call. We'll take phone calls all the way through the rest of the interview here. We'll go first to Georgia, WLPG. Robbie, you're on with John Eldredge and Sam Eldredge. What would you like to share with us today?
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you taking my call. I just want to say to John Eldredge, I really do appreciate the ministry that you have. Your book, I've read maybe 5, 6, 8 times.
Wild at Heart, yeah.
Wild at Heart, and bought the new version when it came out, and I passed it along. I can't tell you how many times to other men. What really struck my heart was originally I read a statement, and I'm probably not going to quote it exactly right, but the statement was that basically we have a group of men in the church who are just not men, and it struck my heart that, I was in ministry, have been in ministry for 30 years, and it just struck my heart that, we're trying to soften it up rather than creating godly men that look like and act like men. And I appreciate what you did to really, embolden my commitment to ministry and to talk to men as men. And I just want you to know that it's been awesome for me and many people that I've been connected to. And I thank you for investing in the next generation. That your sons are coming along, and thank you for what you've done.
Robbie, appreciate it. We have to go to a break here, but any comments you might want to have, John, after the break, we can do that. But also that opens up a line if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. If you just joined us, talking about this new book, Killing Lions, A Guide Through the Trials Young Men Face. John Eldredge and Sam Eldredge with us. You can go to Ransom Heart and find it there. We also have a video that we've posted on our website, pointofview.net, as well as information about the book, and we've even put it in our Point of View store. It is published by Thomas Nelson. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if you have any difficulty finding it, follow one of the links so that you can put that book in your hands or in the hands of somebody that really needs to read it, and there are certainly many that will benefit from it. Let's take a break, but when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Love to hear your story. We'll take some of those calls right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about Killing Lions, a guide through the trials young men face. And we will certainly take your phone calls in just a minute. John, let me come to you because we just heard from one listener who was probably representative of millions of men that have benefited from your books or other books that have come out here that are trying to bring men back to a level of wholeness, of integrity, and also to understand their masculinity. In some respects, this book answers the question, so what? In other words, we do this not so that you just hold in, but so that you can then minister to others. And here is a great book that I would think both fathers and sons, as well as mentors and those who are proteges, can actually follow and use so that they can be all that God intended them to be.
Exactly. Yeah, this isn't just about, learning to be a great water skier or going hunting. This is about being the kind of man that the world can depend on and the world desperately needs right now. What I loved about Robbie's comments was, here's a guy who got a vision, saw that the church was just creating nice guys, soft men, good men, but just very nice men, and he used the message, as he said, to begin to reach out to guys, and what he discovered is that it works. Like, men are just waiting for someone to show them the way. They're just waiting for the invitation, and we're just hoping to maybe offer that through this book and offer a little bit of guidance on how you can go after the hearts of a lot of guys.
Through this next half hour here, I want to get into some of the issues you get into, and that is marriage and decision-making, spiritual warfare, and the rest. But, Sam, I did mention earlier that I wanted to maybe hear from you on this issue of calling and meaning. Not terribly meaningful in some of the first jobs that you and your peers had, but if you understand your calling, even the most mundane job, even drudgery, can have its significance if you look at that through God's eyes.
Yeah, they totally can. I think what people are seeing about this generation that's called the millennials is that they are a group of people who do care. They really want meaning. There's all of these little products now that every business is coming out with their chocolate that's slavery-free, with their shoes that you buy one pair and they give another, with coffee that's paying a fair wage. Like, there's all of these things that are trying to fill this void that they're seeing in our generation that wants meaning, that wants to bring change, that wants to help the world. And I think that's a really good thing. But it gets really confusing when you're, cleaning toilets. And you're like, okay, I want something with meaning, and this is about as far from it as I could possibly think at the moment.
That's right.
And what was so good about the initial advice on the 20s that my dad was giving me was that these are the years of discovery and development that you actually get to be exploring and becoming the kind of man who can handle the kind of dreams that you're longing for, that no small job is wasted, that you can take all of this as training of building character, not in the Calvin Hobbes sense, but in like the true inner becoming a good man. And it changes everything. All of a sudden, wiping down tables doesn't feel like you're just a waste and that there's no meaning in the world, but that you're actually becoming the man who has meaning.
Very good. Let me come to you, John, for just a few minutes. Decision-making is important in every generation, but especially at this age, the 20-somethings, and now we were postponing some of those decisions to the 30-somethings, are making major decisions about career, about finances, about marriage, about all sorts of things. And what advice as a father have you passed on to Sam, and what advice are you passing on in this book, Killing Lions, to those who need to make very important decisions and use biblical principles to do so?
Well, probably the first thing is what we're modeling in the book, and then in the chapter on decision-making, we do say, reach out to someone. Talk to an older man or woman. They're out there, and they have life experience, and don't make these decisions on your own, not the big ones.
Yes.
You betcha. The small stuff, a young man needs to feel like he can stretch his wings, and we really bless that. You bet. Take a full swing. We're not trying to hold your hand through this decade. But in the major things, the girl, marriage, career, joining the military, choosing a mission field, you want to get counsel on that. The other thing that we kind of lay out in kind of a series of, here's some basic principles on decision-making, is just trying to hold back on impulsiveness.
Right.
I remember the 20s, and a lot of my decisions were impulsive. I quit jobs on impulse. I took jobs on impulse, And we're trying to say, look, save your impulsive decisions for, donuts and cannonballing into swimming pools. Like, don't let impulse, don't let impatience, don't let frustration guide your decision making. Kerby, and I know you'll get this, is we're trying to take the pressure off.
Right.
And just even in the decision-making chapter, we're saying, look, in God's economy, you get second chances. Like, very few of your decisions in this decade are irreversible. I graduated with a degree in theater, and I actually ran a theater company in Los Angeles. And then I made a career shift, and I actually went to Washington, D.C. and worked in politics. And by the time I was 35, I had become a counselor and was a writer. And just helping guys see you're not blowing it if you're in a really terrible job right now. You're not blowing it. God's in all of this. And so take a deep breath, step back from the ledge. He's with you. Let's reframe a decade. And frankly, we're just trying to take a lot of the pressure off.
Sure. And one of the other ways you take pressure off is you were talking about impulsive, but there's a section in your book here, Am I Holding Back from Stepping Up? And you talk about this idea of paralysis masquerading as confusion, as you call it, that haunts every man. And that is, do I have to make the right decision? If I make the wrong decision at the age of 24, will I, at the age of 65, look back and say, boy, if I just made the right decision back at the age of 24, I wouldn't have had the disaster I have right now. There are some decisions that are a little bit irreversible. Marriage fits into that category, but you're also on the one hand saying don't be impulsive, but on the other hand, don't kind of be overwhelmed by the paralysis of analysis either.
Exactly, or the paralysis of Adam. I mean, that's one of the qualities that we got from Adam, who in his moment of greatest trial chokes and doesn't step in and intervene for Eve. And so there is a paralysis that kind of comes with fallen man. And that is a good question, because stepping up is important.
Yes.
Stepping into things is important. And there's something about the millennials that I think your listeners will resonate with when I describe it. Doubt has become a virtue.
Oh, yes. Well said.
I really respect this group of people. As Sam said, they want meaning, they want purpose. My goodness, they're rushing off to fight human trafficking. They're doing great things in the world. But because they are the children of the postmodern collapse, and their, educations, public and private, they've been given the idea that to be authentic, to be true, to be a genuine person, you really just have to kind of stay in doubt. Mm-hmm. You can't know anything for certain.
Can't step out.
Yeah. What I'm trying to point out is that for a man, you don't want to hide behind doubt. That can actually just become sort of a hiding place for you. You do need to step up. You do need to take a swing, knowing that God, your Father, is with you, and if you make a bad call, it's not irreversible.
Good point. Sam, let me come to you since we've been talking about your generation. And your generation is perhaps the most educated. Look at those by the age of 26 that have achieved a college degree, a higher percentage than any generation in history, even more so than the baby boom generation. So there is this sort of academic mindset that says, I need to look at everything. I need to carefully evaluate it. I need to deconstruct it. And as a result, sometimes there's a real need to step up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, oh man, with the education has come both the blessing of being able to look at the world and being able to not, swallow every pill that's handed to you. And there's good things in that. You want to wrestle with faith and make it your own. You want to make wise decisions and invest in businesses that are doing well. But the other hidden piece in there that we're not really paying attention to is what's actually driving us. And it is this piece of identity about if you go to a college, if you kind of, and most people do these days, you really do embrace the culture there, and you embrace an identity there that isn't always the most clear. And a lot of those decisions that you end up making or not making really are based out of that. And it was a huge chapter for us to be talking about before we could make decisions, before I could move towards a girl, before I could have other questions answered, we need to talk about my identity.
Wow. We need to take a break. When we come back, I would like to focus just a little bit of time, John, especially on spiritual warfare. You talk about that in this book, or actually you talk about it in almost every one of your books. I'd like to get some thoughts there. Might have time for another phone call if we can get in real quickly, 1-800-351-1212. Again, talking about the book, Killing Lions, A Guide Through the Trials Young Men Face. About 180 pages, published by Thomas Nelson. Look for it in your local bookstore. But we also have links to, of course, our friends that are there at Ransom Heart, or you can go to killinglions.com to find out more. We also have it on our website because we think very highly of the book, and I would commend it to you. Find out about the book, find out about the videos, do what you can to help those around you, and this might even be a great small group study as well. We'll continue our conversation right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes as we talk about the book Killing Lions. John Eldredge, Sam Eldredge with us. I might also mention near the end of the book a daily prayer, a prayer for guidance, a prayer for sexual healing, some very important focuses there as well. And I thought, John, for just a minute we might talk about spiritual warfare, because certainly there is a spiritual dimension to some of this. It isn't just decisions about marriage and family or decision-making about career. It isn't just about dealing with some of the hurts and pains or trying to find your calling and meaning. This is all played out in a spiritual battle. And every one of your books, at one way or another, addresses this issue of spiritual warfare. What do you pass on as an older man to younger men to watch out for in terms of the spiritual battle?
Well, we're trying to wake them up first off, because again, you have these millennials who have these beautiful hearts to change the world and to, fight injustice and to try and bring Jesus to other cultures. At the same time, we talked about the entitlement and even a kind of naivete, really, that isn't their fault. But if you do not take into account the fact that you have an enemy, you're not going to find your dreams, and you're not going to find your calling. I mean, so many young guys I know, and I was just, again, reading some letters today from guys who are 26 and even 30, feeling lost and almost feeling betrayed by God, because all they see in the world is two players, them and God, humanity and God. I'm trying to say, whoa, wait a second, you have an enemy, right? John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Yes, God cares about your dreams. Yes, he cares about your desire to change the world, but you can't rush out there unless you are equipped to discern and deal with evil. So that's our hope, because they're young warriors. I mean, that's the great thing. These young guys, like, if you can train them and point them in the right direction, you put the right tools in their hands, they are going to change the world.
They are. Well, and again, yeah. I want to just get Sam's comment on that as well, because you're dealing with a situation in which you have the motivation, but as he also shared just a little bit, the naivete. But you talk about, Sam, a little bit in the book, some of the questions that you and especially your peers have about Christianity, about what is the role of Christian faith in this postmodern secular world where the fastest growing demographic in your generation are those who call themselves none of the above. I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I'm none of the above. I really don't have a place for religion in my life. What about that?
Sure. Well, I think what's something that's really huge about my generation is that we grew up at the same time that the internet was really growing up. The expansion there, and then it really made the world smaller and therefore also bigger, because now you can go anywhere. And the piece that went along with that was marketing. Marketing took off with the internet, and we were essentially the guinea pigs of the complex, of trying to figure out what sells, what doesn't, trying to sell lifestyles. And as a byproduct of that, our generation has really strong detectors of the genuine and the disingenuous, of whether something is authentic or not. And I think what we've seen in a lot of different churches, they feel like marketing. It feels like, come here, we don't have a whole lot else to offer, but we need to get our numbers up and give, and there's like a light show, and it doesn't feel true. It doesn't feel genuine, and we walk away from it. We don't want to touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. And it really, pair that with doubt, pair that with the education, and you really have a culture of people who are like, if something feels real, if something feels genuine, I'm all in. But I'm trying to find that. I don't know, and that's where the questions of faith come in. What is the role of the Bible? What is the role of God? What are these roles? I want the real thing. Don't sell me something.
John, let me come back to you, because it seems to me what I hear him saying is we're looking for authentic Christians. We're looking for authenticity. We're looking for vulnerability. That sounds like kind of the mission statement for Ransom Hearts.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
And it's really kind of your book, Wild at Heart, isn't it?
It's really, that's what we're about.
Yes.
Because they can't see a different mom and dad at church and a different mom and dad at home. They deserve more, and they deserve to see a trueness and an integrity throughout our lives, a consistency there. And what's absolutely beautiful about this generation, Sam said it kind of delicately, this generation has very strong dog squat detectors.
Yeah.
They can sniff it out, and they don't have any tolerance for it. Well, I love that. That's great, because if you encounter the real Jesus of Nazareth, he's the real deal.
Yeah.
And there are answers. I remember years ago a story told about Francis Schaeffer. He was pounding on the wall in his house, and he was shouting, "There are answers. There are answers." We can present those in a way that I think the millennials will really respond to, but only if our lives have integrity. Only if we're, it's the old thing, practice what you preach.
Very good. That'll preach. Just before we end, I thought I would come back to you, Sam. I'm not asking you to market this, but I am asking you at least to explain some of the resources, because as people go to these websites, they're going to see that it's more than just a book. It's an adventure, and there are videos. And you mentioned just a few minutes ago how those could be used. And I know that we have people right now that are listening to this program that are pastors or actually teachers of Sunday school classes or Bible fellowships. I know others looking for small groups. I know some are saying, our men's movement isn't really all that it needs to be, and I'm certainly looking for some ways to minister to men. I'm looking for a way to maybe reach out to this younger generation. It seems to me that through your experiences, adventures, through your books and your videos, you have some things to offer to some of those small groups and churches. So explain how people might be able to use those.
Yeah, I love talking about them because I believe in them, because I believe that they actually are genuine. And with the book, we wrote a journal that goes with it, and I was actually kind of, I pushed back against it at first because I don't know a lot of young guys that will go through just answering questions. And so what we tried to do with our journal is have it be like multi-part. There are pieces that we recommend other things to go and watch. There are questions that you actually should start conversations with. And there are pieces in the journal where you can go and do something. We actually encourage you to go and do specific things that follow the chapters. So that, to begin with, is a great resource. And again, these videos, they're incredible. We're actually debuting the final one tonight. There's a 17-part series. It's been an awesome journey to see how people have been following along. Each one kind of has a different topic about it. They're beautiful. They're easy to share and pass along. We get a lot of positive feedback on it, and it feels like those could be a really cool way to, shoot somebody one of these videos, pass it on, or do a group and watch them once a week. We're excited about the potential there. And we have a online magazine called And Sons Magazine,
right,
where we talk about things like beauty and adventure and Eve and growing yourself. And I think guys will really connect well there. There's a lot going on.
Well, a lot going on. I might just mention, as you get a copy of the book, a lot of the information for that is in the back of the book. But again, most of you have internet access, so let me just encourage you to go to the website. We have a link to ransomheart.com. We also, of course, can point you to killinglions.com. We have the video already there, which I would encourage you to watch. Maybe click on that share button so that you could put it on your Facebook page or your blog, or send it to someone you think might be interested in learning a little bit more about this guide through the trials young men face, and so you can maximize the interview we did today. John, it's always been great to have you on the program, and I so appreciate the fact that not only did you join us today, but you brought your son along, that you had him write the book, and he gave us that much time. So I appreciate both of you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Kerby, we were really honored to be on your show, and you really do host well. You have a lot of integrity to what you do.
Well, and I think we kind of get it, and so we figured out what this is and why it's important, and we certainly appreciate sharing that adventure and that journey, because one of the themes of Point of View is to reach out to this next generation. This is certainly a book that will reach out to those young men and some of the things they face. So thanks for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yep. Talk to you next time.
Okay. Let me just mention one last time, just before we run out of time, that is, you go to our website, pointofview.net. You can find an article about this book. You can find a video about this book, and you can find the web links about this book. And then as you go to those web links, you will find that there's a whole lot more. As they say, there's a lot more than just a book on killing lions. There is the journal that we mentioned. There are the videos, and there are all sorts of resources. And if you're really wanting to reach out to men, and you really want to do the best you can to maybe reach this next generation, this might be a very effective tool in your toolbox to be effective and to reach out. And so we certainly do commend it to you, and wanted to expose you to this today here on Point of View. As you go to the website, pointofview.net, you're going to find all sorts of videos that we have posted, many of the articles. And of course, if you are not receiving an email from us, I might encourage you to click on that box that says Get Involved. That's a way we can send you more information and educate you about many of these issues. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.